strike out boldly, a person has to feel that his rear is defended, that he has support on both his flanks, that there is solid earth beneath his feet. All these conditions were absent for the Article 58s, having passed through the meat grinder of political interrogation. The human being was physically crushed in body. He had been starved. He hadn't slept. He had frozen in punishment cells. He had lain there, a beaten man. But it wasn't only his body. His soul was crushed too. Over and over he had been told and had demonstrated to him that his views and his conduct in life and his relationships with people had all been wrong because they had brought him to ruin. All that was left in that scrunched up wad, the engine room of the law, had spewed out into the prisoner transport was agreed for life, and no understanding whatsoever. To crush him once and for all, and to cut him off from all others once and for all. That was the function of interrogation under Article 58. The convicted prisoner had to learn that his worst guilt out in freedom had been his attempt somehow to get together or unite with others by any route but the party organizer, the trade union organizer, or the administration. In prison, this fear went so far as to become fear of all kinds of collective action. Two voices uttering the same complaint, or two prisoners signing a complaint on one piece of paper, gun shy now and for a good long time to come, of any kind and every kind of collaboration or unification. The pseudo-politicals were not prepared to unite even against the thieves, nor would they even think of bringing along a weapon, knife or a bludgeon, for the stole-pin car or the transit prison. In the first place, why have one, and against whom? In the second place, if you did use it, then considering the aggravating circumstance of your malevolent Article 58, you might be shot when you were retried. In the third place, even before that, your punishment for having a knife when they searched you would be different from the thief's. For him to have a knife was a mere misbehavior, tradition. He didn't know any better, but for you to have one was terrorism. Finally, many of the people imprisoned under Article 58 were peaceful people, very often elderly too, and often ill, and they had gotten along in their lives with words and without resorting to fisticuffs, and they weren't any more prepared for them now than they had been before. Nor had the thieves ever been put through the same kind of interrogation. The entire interrogation had consisted of 2 sessions, an easy trial and an easy sentence, and they wouldn't have to serve it out. They would be released ahead of time. Either they would be amnestied, or else they would simply escape. Even during interrogation, no one ever deprived a thief of his legitimate parcels, consisting of abundant packages from the loot kept by his underworld comrades who were still on the loose. He never grew thin, was never weak for a single day, and in transit he ate at the expense of the innocent non-thieves, whom he called his own jargon the frayers, or innocents or suckers. Not only did the articles of the code dealing with thieves and bandits not oppress the thief, he was in fact proud of his convictions under them, and he was supported in this pride by all the chiefs in blue shoulder boards and blue piping. Oh, that's nothing. Even though you're a bandit and a murderer, you are not a traitor of the motherland. You are one of our own people, you will reform. There was no Section 11 for organization in the thieves' articles in the code. Organization was not forbidden to thieves, and why should it be? Let it help develop in them the feelings of collectivism that people in our society need so badly. And disarming them was just a game. They weren't punished for having a weapon. They're thieves' law was respected. They can't be anything but what they are. And a new murderer in the cell would not increase a murderer's sentence, a new murderer in the cell, but instead would bring him new laurels. And all that went very deep indeed in works of the last century. The lumpen proletariat was criticized for little more than a certain lack of discipline, for fickleness of mood, and Stalin was always partial to the thieves, after all, who robbed the banks for him. Back in 1901, his comrades in the party and in the prison accused him of using common criminals against his political enemies. From the 20s on, the obliging term social ally became widely used. This was Makarenko's contention to these could be reformed. According to Makarenko, the origin of crime lay solely in counter-revolutionary underground. Those were the ones who couldn't be reformed. Engineers, priests, socialist revolutionaries, Mensheviks. And why shouldn't they steal? There was no one to put a stop to it. 3 or 4 brazen thieves working hand in glove could lord over several dozen frightened and cowed pseudo-politicals. With the approval of the administration, on the basis of progressive doctrine. And even if they didn't drive off the thieves with their fists, why didn't the victims at least make complaints? After all, every sound could be heard in the corridor, and a convoy guard was marching slowly back and forth right out there. Yes, that is a question. Every sound and every complaining cry can be heard, and the convoy just keeps marching back and forth. Why doesn't he interfere? Just a yard away from him, in the half-dark cave of the compartment, they are plundering a human being. Why doesn't the soldier of the government police interfere? For the same reason, he too has been indoctrinated. Even more than that, after many years of favoring thieves, the convoy itself has slipped in their direction. The convoy itself became a thief. From the middle of the 30s until the middle of the 40s, during that 10-year period of the thieves' most flagrant debauches and most intense oppression of the politicals, no one at all can recall a case in which a convoy guard intervened in the plundering of a political in a cell, in a railroad car, or in a Black Maria. They will tell you of innumerable cases in which the convoy accepted stolen goods from the thieves and in return bought them vodka, snacks sweeter than the rations too, and smokes. The examples are so numerous as to be typical. Convoy sergeant, after all, hasn't anything either. He has his gun, his greatcoat roll, his mess tin, his soldier's ration. It would be cruel to require him to escort an enemy of the people in an expensive overcoat or chrome leather boots, or with the swag of luxurious city articles, and to reconcile himself to that inequality. It's not taking these things just one additional form of class struggle, after all. Was not taking these things just one additional form of class struggle, after all. And what other norms were there? In 1945-46, when the prisoners streamed in, not just from anywhere, but from Europe, and wore and had their bags unheard, and wore and had in their bags unheard of European articles. Even the convoy officers could not restrain themselves. Their service had kept them from the front, but at the end of the war it also kept them from the harvest of booty. And I ask you, was that just? And so in these circumstances, the convoy guards systematically mixed the thieves and the politicals in each compartment of their stalopin, not through lack of space for them elsewhere, and not through haste, but out of greed. And the thieves did not let them down. They stripped the beavers of everything, and then those possessions migrated into the suitcases of the convoy. But what could be done if the beavers had been loaded into the stalopin cars, and the train was moving, and there simply weren't any thieves at all? They simply hadn't put any on board. And if they weren't being shipped out on prisoner transports that day, even from one of the stations along the way. This could and did happen. Several such cases are known. In 1947, they were transporting from Moscow to the Vladimir Central Prison a group of foreigners who had opulent possessions, as could be seen the very first time their suitcases were opened. At the point, the convoy itself began a systematic confiscation of their belongings right there in the railroad car, so that nothing should be missed. The prisoners were forced to undress down to their bare skin and to sit on the floor of the car near the toilet while their things were examined and taken away. But the convoy guard failed to take into account that they were taking these prisoners not to a camp but to a genuine prison. On their arrival there, Korneyev handed in a written complaint describing exactly what happened. They found the particular unit of convoy guards and searched them. Some of the things were recovered and returned to their owners, who had also received compensation and money for those that weren't recovered. They say that the convoy guards got from 10 to 15 years. However, this is something that cannot be checked. And anyway, they would have been convicted under an ordinary non-political article of the code, and they wouldn't have had to spend a long time in prison. However, that was an exceptional case, and if he managed to restrain his greed in time, the chief of the convoy would have realized that it was better not to get involved in it. And here's another, less complicated case, which probably means that it happened often. In August 1945, in the Moscow Novosibirsk Stalopin car, in which A. Susi was being transported, it turned out that there weren't any thieves, and the trip was a long one, and the Stalopin just crawled along at that time, without hurrying in the least. All in good time, the convoy chief declared a search, one prisoner at a time in the corridor with his things. Those summoned were made to undress in accordance with prison rules. But that wasn't why the search was being conducted, for each prisoner who had been searched was, in fact, put right back in his own crowded compartment, and anything forbidden could simply have been passed from hand to hand. The real purpose of the search was to examine their personal articles, the clothes they were wearing, whatever was in their bags, and right there, beside the bags, not in the least bored by the whole protracted search, the chief of the convoy guard, an officer, stood with a haughty poker face, with his assistant, a sergeant, beside him. Sinful greed kept trying to pop out, but the officer kept it hidden under pretended indifference. It was the same situation as an old rake looking over a little girl's, but embarrassed by the presence of outsiders. Yes, and by that of the little girls too, and not knowing exactly how to proceed, how badly he needed just a few thieves. But there were no thieves in the transport. There were no thieves aboard, but there were individuals among the prisoners who had already been infected by the thief-laden atmosphere in the prison. After all, the example of these is instructive and calls forth imitations. Demonstrate that there is an easy way to live in prison. 2 recent officers were in one of the compartments, Iine from the Navy and Merezhkov. They were both 58s, but their attitude had already changed. Iine and Merezhkov's support, proclaimed himself the monitor of the compartment, and, through a convoy guard, requested a meeting with their chief. He had fathomed that haughtiness and in need of a pimp. This was unheard of, but Iine was summoned, and they had a chat somewhere. Following Iine's example, someone in the second compartment also asked for a meeting, and that person was similarly received. And the next morning, they issued not 20 ounces of bread, a prisoner transport ration at the time, but no more than 9 ounces. They gave out the ration, and a quiet murmur began. A murmur, but in fear of any collective action. These politicals did not speak up. In the event, only one among them loudly asked the guard distributing the bread, "Citizen Chief, how much does this ration weigh?" "The correct weight," he was told. "I demand a re-weighing, otherwise I will not accept it," the dissatisfied prisoner declared loudly. The whole car fell silent. Many waited before beginning to eat their ration, expecting that theirs too would be reweighed. And at that moment, in all his spotlessness, the officer appeared. Everyone fell silent, which made his words all the weightier and all the more irresistible. Which one spoke out against the Soviet government here? All hearts stopped beating. People will protest that this is a universal approach, that even out in freedom every little chief declares himself to be the Soviet government, and just try to argue with him about it. But for those who are panicky, who have just been sentenced for anti-Soviet propaganda, the threat is more frightening. Who was starting a mutiny over the bread ration? The officer demanded. "Citizen Lieutenant, I only wanted." The guilty rebel was already trying to swing it all away. "Aha, you're the bastard. You're the one who doesn't like the Soviet government. And why rebel? Why argue? Wasn't it really easier to eat a little underweight ration, to suffer in silence? And now we have fallen right in it." "You stinking shit, you counter-revolutionary. You ought to be hanged, and you have the nerve to demand that the bread ration be reweighed. You rat, the Soviet government gives you food and drink, and you have the brass to be dissatisfied. You don't know what you're going to get for that." Orders to the guard. "Take him out." The lock rattles. "Come out, you, hands behind your back." They bring him out, they bring out the unfortunate. Now who else is dissatisfied? Who else wants his bread ration reweighed? And it's not as if you could prove anything anyway. It's not as if they'd take your word against the lieutenants if you were to complain somewhere that there were only 9 ounces instead of 20. It's quite enough to show a well-beaten dog the whip, and all the rest turned out to be satisfied. And that was how the penalty ration was confirmed for all the days along the journey. And they began to withhold sugar too. The convoy had appropriated it. And this took place during the summer of our 2 great victories, in Germany and Japan, victories which embellished the history of our fatherland, which our grandsons and great-grandsons will learn about in school. Prisoners went hungry for a day, and then a second day, by which time several of them began to get a bit wiser, and Iine said to his compartment, "Look, fellows, if we go on this way, we're lost. Come on now, all of you who have some good stuff with you, let me have it." and I'll trade it for something to eat. With great self-assurance, he accepted some articles and turned down their others. Not all the prisoners were willing to let their things go. You see, no one forced them either. And then he and Merezhkov asked to be allowed to leave the compartment, and strangely enough the convoy let them out. Taking the things, they went off toward the compartment of the convoy guard, and they returned from there with sliced loaves of bread and with makorka. These very loaves constituted the 11 ounces missing from the daily rations. Now, however, they were not distributed on an equal basis, but went out only to those who had handed over their belongings, and that was quite fair after all. They had admitted they were satisfied with the reduced bread ration. It was also fair because the belongings were, after all, worth something, and it was right that they should be paid for. And it was also fair in the long view, because those things were simply too good for camp and were destined to be taken away or stolen there. The makorka had belonged to the guard. The soldiers shared their precious makorka with the prisoners, and that was fair too, since they had eaten the prisoners' bread and drunk up their sugar, which was too good for enemies anyway. And last, it was only fair too that Iine and Merezhkov took the largest share for themselves, even though they'd contributed nothing, because without them all of this would not have been arranged. So they sat crammed in the sudden darkness, and some of them chewed on their neighbors' chunks of bread, and their neighbors sat there and watched them. The guard permitted smoking only on a collective basis every 2 hours, and the whole car was filled with smoke as if there'd been a fire. Those who had at first clung to their things now regretted that they hadn't given them to Iine and asked him to take them, but Iine said he'd only take them later on. The whole operation wouldn't have worked so well and so thoroughly had it not been for the slow trains and slow stolligan cars of the immediate post-war years, when they kept on hitching them from one train and hitching them to another, and held them waiting in the stations. And at the same time, if it hadn't been the immediate post-war period, neither would they have been those great inspiring belongings. Their train took a week to get to Kubitschev, and during an entire week they got only 9 ounces of bread a day. This, to be sure, was twice the ration distributed during the siege of Leningrad. And they did get dried Caspian carp and water in addition. They had to ransom their remaining bread ration with their personal possessions, and soon the supply of these articles exceeded the demand, and the convoy guards became very choosy and reluctant to take more things. They were received at the Kubitschev transit prison, given baths, and returned as a group to that very same Stolypin. The convoy which took them over was new, but in passing on the relay baton, the previous crew had evidently told them how to put the squeeze on, and the very same system of ransoming their own rations functioned all the way to Novosibirsk. It is easy to see how this infectious experiment might have spread rapidly to the whole units of the convoy guards. And when they were unloaded on the ground between the trains of Novosibirsk, some new officer came up and asked them any complaints against the convoy, and they were all so confused that nobody answered. The first chief of convoy had calculated accurately. This was Russia. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.